Robin Black's story collection, If I Loved You, I Would Tell You This, was a finalist for the Frank O'Connor Short Story Prize and the winner of the 2010 Philadelphia Athenaeum Fiction Award. Her novel Life Drawing was longlisted for the Flaherty Dunham Prize, First Novel Prize, and the Folio Prize, and the IMPAC Dublin Literary Award. Her work has been published in such publications as the New York Times Book Review, One Story, O Magazine, Condé Nast Traveler, and the Chicago Tribune. Robin lives in Philadelphia with her family and teaches in the Rutgers-Camden MFA program. Please welcome Robin Black.
It's called Around the World. There was a woman across the train aisle in a roomette identical to mine. She was older, maybe in her 60s, that was my guess, and she was Canadian, tall and ungainly. She had what seemed to me to be an enviable strength, hoisting her enormous bag around as though it were a purse. That was how I first guessed she was Canadian. Not that she was so strong, though I think of Canadians as strong, but that the suitcase was dotted with stickers of the Quebecois flag. It was spring, the spring that I turned 27, June 1999, and I suppose I was young enough then that this woman whom I thought was in her 60s could have been in her late 50s. She seemed so much older than I, and much louder, too. One of those people who spoke to everyone and anyone, a constant stream of hellos to the porters, other passengers, and then ongoing chatter to no one in particular, as though she were giving a demonstration, a running commentary on settling into her roomette. Oh yes, the suitcase sits right there, fits nicely, and I'll have to see about this window shade, though if I pull it just so, yes, that's it. Until the train began to hum and lurch, at which point she sat, choosing the seat going backwards, the one facing mine, so we were staring at each other through our doorways across the aisle. Well, that's done anyway, she said, smiling a bit, horsey, yellow teeth. I'm Maura Clark. I'd get up and shake your hand, but I haven't washed mine yet, and everything in here is filthy. Travel is filthy, inevitably. Wonderful, of course, but filthy. It's nice to meet you, I said, though I disliked her right away. I disliked her heartiness and her assertions, her easy positioning of herself at the center of the scene containing us both. And I disliked, too, that though I never volunteered my name, she never asked. And as she talked and talked, I thought she would be a terrible bore for this long trip, which wasn't far from wrong, as it turned out. Though she wasn't going all the way to New Orleans, she was heading only to Atlanta, she explained, to attend some symposium on a relief effort somewhere, or maybe it was on relief efforts in general. She was always involved with relief efforts, she said. If there's a catastrophe anywhere on this planet, you can bet I'll be there like a one-woman Red Cross. She spoke in paragraphs, breaking them up with the words, you know, though not in the way most people do, not that nervous tick interjection, you know, but something that bothered me terribly as I sat there nearly silent. You know. As if she thought I really did know. As if there was so much I should have known and didn't know. Well, and of course the business in the 80s down in Central America, you know. I tried to look knowing. I tried not to look bored. When a loudspeaker interrupted to say a porter would be through soon to take our dinner reservations, she suggested we share a table. When you're traveling alone, they put you wherever they can fit you. It's much better this way, you know. Someone will join us, but we'll also have each other. Safety in numbers, she said. How about 6:15? I agreed. Of course I agreed. Back then, I almost always agreed. I had meant to leave Philadelphia without leaving any word. I had meant to disappear. That was the fantasy that had given me the gumption to phone Amtrak and use a credit card I never meant to pay off to buy a ticket on the furthest going train I could find. The fantasy of vanishing, the fantasy of abandoning consequence. But then at the last minute I scrawled a note and left it on the kitchen table. It didn't say where I was going, just that I was going, so he wouldn't think I'd been kidnapped or killed. I didn't bother quitting my hostess job at the fancy restaurant, but I also didn't kid myself that anyone would be worried at my never showing up again. I would get off in New Orleans because that was the last stop, and this was all about going as far away as possible. but I couldn't imagine myself staying anywhere for long. I was in flight and could only picture myself in motion. He had hit me. Not then, but 4 months before. My husband had hit me hard, a fist to my jaw, so I had reeled from my feet, knocking over a chair and landing on the tile, my backside bruised to match my face, like some kind of exit wound for his rage. We were both stunned. It was a moment we had approached before but never reached. He cried, I cried, never, never, he said. He never would again. And I believed him until 4 months later when I took a pregnancy test. I was alone when I peed on the stick and watched the 2 lines emerge in a plus, saw the big fat yes of that test, and I didn't think baby. I thought husband who slugged me in the jaw. 2 days later, I boarded the Crescent for New Orleans. When I was a kid, we had a pool table in the basement. Before I was old enough to play the game, I used to love lining up 2 balls and smacking them hard with a third. That was what I thought about right after the pregnancy test, how the force of impact would send the other ball rolling, not the one that got hit, but the next. I left my roomette at exactly 6:13, conscientious even on this day of my freedom. Maura Clark's door was closed, her curtains drawn, and it crossed my mind that she might be asleep, but I didn't investigate. The path from my roomette to the dining room went through other sleeping quarters, some like mine with a center aisle, some with larger rooms taking up all but a small corridor to one side, all silent as though this were some kind of phantom train. Except between the cars. Between the cars, the hush was broken by a roar and by a blackened smell and by the test of keeping one's footing across the ever-shifting fault line. If you were in a mood to see it all as some kind of quest, it was easy enough. You could take the simple facts of the train and of walking through it one way while it sped underfoot the other way, and you could feel danger where there was none, and you could think of yourself as very brave. Maura was already seated at a table when I arrived. She waved me in. I always come a minute or 2 early, she said. It helps. As I sat, something behind me caught her eye. It's Freddie, look. She lifted her hand in another wave. I turned to see a tall, skinny man approach. They've put me with you, he said, as Maura slid over to make room for him. I asked them to. Wonderful, she said. This is perfect. I was sure they must know one another in real life as I thought of it, but it turned out they had just met the hour before. They were travelers, both of them, nomads in a way that I would never be, even if I didn't understand that then. They knew how to be friends for only a brief time, how to skip over months and years and lapse right away into the postures of intimacy. It didn't seem to matter that they would never see one another again, that none of this would linger, or maybe that was the point, no consequence. It was appealing to me then, that night, though they were not. They bored me, both of them, and I thought there was something disturbing about him. I thought he might be playing with himself under the table while we talked. But still, I envied them, their seeming comfort with rootlessness. She teased him as we ordered food, joking that he must have eaten every Amtrak meal 1,000 times. Trains and yo-yos, she said, leaning toward me, for all the world as though she were explaining her cousin or her brother. Freddie is a yo-yo champ, you know, won 2 championships. I expected him to shake the statement off. I had spent a lifetime around people who tried to appear modest, whether or not they actually were. But he nodded and launched into a litany of his triumphs, which turned out to be 3 championships, not 2, if you count my junior win. But that had been many years before. He had walked away long since. Better to retire a champ, he said, leave the crowds in an eternally desirous state. His face looked like it had been stretched. A silly, putty face draped around milky blue eyes and full, pale pink lips. I was in a mood that night to believe that the universe puts our souls out on display like that we wear our character in our features, so I held him responsible for his ugliness. I was hard-hearted that way, and illogical too. I had seen enough to know better, my handsome husband, his hateful self, but I had somehow failed to learn. I ordered half a bottle of red wine, Amtrak's finest, Freddie called it, knowing I would only drink a sip. Most of what people talk about on overnight trains is trains. Freddie and Maura lectured me in dueling monologues about the history of the railroad and the trips each had been on, while all around us throughout the meal at every table the question drifted, so why did you decide to take the train? Though nobody asked me, my companions were performers, both, solely that. He drawled on and pulled photographs from pockets. She recounted death tolls and survivor statistics, spoke about the attitude one has to have to do the work she does. Any victory is worth more than every loss. I don't remember if I ever told them my name. It seems odd to think that I did not, but if I did, I would have had to volunteer it. Nobody asked. I thought them strangely incurious for people who had been driven to see so much of the world. I found them puzzling. It isn't a reaction I would have anymore. The paradoxes of narcissism no longer surprise or even interest me much. That innocence about human foibles, that default expectation of kindness, of generosity, was an aspect of myself I can barely even imagine now. Maura and Freddie wanted coffee. I made my excuses, so tired, so likely just to fall asleep, so oddly felled by only a sip of wine, which was all true. I held the wall on the way back to my room, and once there, drew the wool curtains shut. I sat on the little toilet and peed, realizing only then how badly I had needed to for how long. I checked the paper for blood when I wiped, as I had every time for the past 2 days, not knowing if I hoped or dreaded that it would be there, but the paper was only damp. The upper bunk had been made up as I'd asked the porter to do after hearing Maura request that her lower be prepared. It's really very awkward getting up there, she'd said disapprovingly, and I'd claimed to think it looked like fun. I'd half assumed there would be a ladder or a step stool, but realized I would have to climb on top of the toilet and then maybe on the sink. A net hung in the air just above my head. It puzzled me until I decided it was to catch me if I rolled out of the bed, a safety net, though it didn't look strong enough or large enough to be of any use. As I undressed, I avoided myself in the mirror over the tiny sink, aware of my reflection and of everything I didn't want to see. My breasts already swollen and sore as I released them from my bra, my nipples darkened, my veins strangely green, vivid beneath my pale skin. After a lifetime of certainty that the real truth, the only truth that matters, was a matter not of body, but of mind and of heart, the poetic heart, I was only just beginning to understand how wrong that view was and what a luxury it had been to think it so. In my suitcase, I found no nightgown, so I climbed naked in the dark and lay on my back atop the scratchy blanket. I switched on the small overhead light and turned my head toward the window, finding my reflection on the blackened glass, mercifully imprecise. We passed through a large town. My reflection disappeared, and I saw only the lights outside, street lamps in a station, windows in distant houses and in office buildings built close to the tracks, car lights like searchlights. Only at moments did I see myself again, seeping onto the glass, flickering away. I lay like this until I fell asleep, thinking about the vast world, the people out there and all that darkness, the little lights they brandished, the poignant ones they lit, even the stars, which I could not see, were hopelessly tiny, I knew, as I lay there. I had never understood before about everything being so small. And in those moments, these were oddly soothing thoughts to me. The rocking of the train, the irregular rhythm of my disappearance, my reappearance on the glass, and all those companionably insignificant people out there in the blackness, none of them knowing I had passed naked before their eyes. I should have dreamed about yo-yos as I slept. I wish I had. I wish the human mind were so generous to itself. I don't know if I dreamed at all, but I wish I had dreamed of being that toy, of feeling that string unwind, and of feeling myself spin out as if forever. The freedom of that, the illusion of that, and then the lie revealed, the spin back up, reeled in. I wish I had awakened the next morning already knowing that I would take the return train home that very next day. I could have spared myself the shock of self-betrayal, the lasting sear of it, as I arranged for the ticket at the station counter, as I sat on the wooden bench all through the night and talking to my husband on the phone, telling him about the baby, apologizing for scaring him, assuring him we'd be okay, re-entering a misery I wouldn't leave for another 10 years. I wish I had dreamed of the yo-yo's ill-fated escape and awakened with all that sorrow somehow already settled into me. When I opened my door early next morning, Maura's bed was folded away, her room returned to its original state, her suitcase up on the chair. "We're coming into Atlanta," she said, "so this is it for me. If you're worried about today's meals, being alone and all, remember, Freddie stays on to New Orleans." I thanked her and said I'd be all right. The thought of a meal alone with that peculiar man horrified me. Maura handed me a white business card. "It's the number of my very good friend," she said. "Her name is Carla, you know. You'll want to call her any time there's some kind of event, any catastrophe, like an earthquake or a flood, a war. People always worry about me when they hear about those things because they know that I'll be there, and they're quite right, there I am. But I keep her informed. No one can ever reach me, but I can always reach her. And she'll be able to tell you I'm okay. And Freddie, too. I slipped one under his door. I give one to all new friends." I thanked her, holding the card in my hand. The number was handwritten in thick blue ink, the single name Carla beneath. The brakes began to squeal, and as I watched Maura hoist that big suitcase up and then down into the I watched her hoist that big suitcase up and then down into the aisle. As she stood there, a yellow, toothy smile on her face, I felt a cruel impulse. I wanted to tell her that I would never call, that I doubted that anyone had ever called. I was so sure it was true. I was certain there was a woman up in Canada whose phone never rang, except when Maura herself checked in to report from her current chosen hell. But how could I have been certain of anything? That's what I wonder now as I look back on myself. I, who was carrying a baby I both desperately wanted and desperately did not want. I, who had left a violent man to whom I would return in just a day, with whom I would raise that child and also another child. I, who would always regret tearing Maura's card into minuscule pieces as I disembarked in New Orleans, scattering them on the track, who with every flood and earthquake, tsunami, war, would wonder about her, and even with no catastrophe in the news, would long at odd moments, at the frightening moments of my own life, for a number I might call, just to know that she was somehow surviving against the odds. "Well, that's it then," she said, and stepped away before my impulse to hurt her could result in any harm. I listened, shaking my head as she talked her way down the aisle. "Oh, there we go. Did I bump into you? I'm so sorry. It's very narrow in here." I looked again at the card I would later destroy and thought about how self-important this woman was, how willing to barge into everyone in every possible way. As the train began to move again, I saw her on the platform bumping through the scant crowd, and I turned my head. What possible reason for my eyes to linger on that unwelcome sight? I could think of none. So many years was I from knowing that only the promise of unquestioning rescue carried in her powerful form had kept me from feeling those first few hours unbearably abandoned, entirely lost. I closed the door to my roomette before the new occupant across the way, a woman even older than Maura Clark, could settle into her chair and tell me her name.
Thank you all very much for coming to tonight's reading. It's been a true pleasure to have Robin Black here along with our other readers. If you'd like more information about the Rosemont MFA program, you can visit our website, www.rosemont.edu, and find out about all the fantastic events we have. Thanks.